The real story of Caribbean pirates, and why they look the way they do. Have you ever noticed that when we talk about pirates, pretty much the same image pops into our heads? I recently found out that the specific look we have in mind for a pirate is all thanks to a tiny little blip in history. I mean, seriously, just a flash that IT was just 10 years at the start of the 18th century. That single decade gave us the black flag with the skull and crossbones, and the most famous pirates ever. That's when the eye patch, wooden leg, and hook hand became permanently linked to piracy. But why? Pirates have been around for thousands of years, and they're still around today. For example, during the time of ancient Rome, pirates actually managed to kidnap Julius Caesar. They got a ransom for him and let him go. True, they were caught and executed later, but that's not the point. Who today knows what ancient Roman pirates looked like? Or take the Somali pirates. Just 10 years ago, those guys were actively robbing ships in the Indian Ocean. Have you ever seen kids dressed up as Somali pirates for a party? Nope. We all know exactly what a true pirate should look like, and that look belongs to the pirates of the Caribbean in the early 18th century. Since then, generations of people, including you and me, only picture pirates this way. So, what was so special about the Caribbean pirates during that time? Why did they never bury treasure? What did the black flag really mean? In this video, we are going to talk about the life and death of a real Caribbean pirate. By the way, spoiler alert, many of them were gay. Let's imagine we are watching a movie about Caribbean pirates. But not a nice fantasy from Disney, more of a realistic, R-rated film with blood, violence, and rock and roll. Because that's what it was actually like. True story. The Golden Age. So, it's 1716. Ahead of us is the decade that historians call the Golden Age of Piracy. Of course, it didn't just happen overnight. Here's a brief backstory. Starting in the 16th century, the Caribbean islands and the American coast became the center of a massive trade empire connecting Europe, Africa, and America. Merchant ships moved sugar, tobacco, coffee, precious metals, and slaves. This generated huge profits for the 5 leading colonial powers of the time. England, France, Holland, Spain, and Portugal. Trade boomed, and pirates followed. By the 1720s, piracy hit its peak. The generation of pirates from that decade caused a literal global crisis. Estimates suggest that the total number of pirates in the world was about 5,000. Never before or since have their numbers been higher. Those 5 leading trade powers suffered the most from this surge in piracy. Naturally, the authorities weren't just sitting around, they took decisive action. First, piracy became a capital crime. The court didn't have options like 5 to 15 years. No. The only possible punishment was death by hanging. The authorities tried to make every sentence as public as possible, gathering huge crowds. The preferred location for these shows was often the port. This wasn't random. There were lots of sailors there, and the authorities were trying to send a simple message to them. If you try this, you will be hanged. Why good sailors became outlaws? Many sailors actually sympathized with the pirates, and it was often men from this profession who filled the ranks of the ships flying the black flag. So, sailors knew they'd eventually be caught and hanged, yet they still became pirates. What's the logic there? You might think they were just greedy and wanted treasure, but that's far from the truth. Most pirates didn't make a fortune or bury it on a distant island. Understand why so many sailors, often very good and experienced ones, turned pirate. Let's look at the life of an ordinary deckhand in the early 18th century. This was typically a young man, around 27, not from a highborn family. He had 3 potential places to work: a warship, a merchant ship, or a slave ship. It's hard to grasp today, but back then, a ship was super duper high technology, cooler than space rockets are now. In the early 18th century, a vessel could move hundreds of tons of cargo from one continent to another. Plus, they were loaded with dozens of cannons. These ships were the main tool driving global capitalism. England, France, Holland, Spain, and Portugal had the most formidable navies and were the world's superpowers. But the life of a regular sailor who managed this supertech was incredibly tough: long voyages, low pay, and bad food. Sailors even had a joke that their food could run away on its own. It was hard to keep provisions fresh on long trips since they didn't have refrigerators. Food spoiled quickly and was full of vermin. Harsh discipline. Beatings were a common way to maintain order. The specific whip used for punishment was called the cat o' nine tails. It was made of ship ropes, with a handle and 9 knotted tails. When it struck, The knots would tear away pieces of skin. The whole crew would be brought up on deck to watch the public punishment for any breach of discipline. Hundreds of lashes, or even 1,000 for something serious like an attempted mutiny. Not everyone survived these punishments. High mortality. Sailors died young. The average professional life of a sailor back then was short, 7 or 8 years on a ship before he died in battle, from a beating or from a disease like malaria. This is why many sailors willingly crossed over to the pirates. Life on a pirate ship. Democracy and equality life on a pirate ship was organized completely differently. Meet Bartholomew Roberts, or Black Bart, one of the biggest rock stars of the Golden Age of Piracy. In just a few years, he and his crew robbed over 400 merchant ships. Thanks to him, we know how life on a pirate ship was structured. Most pirates preferred smaller, more maneuverable ships. They held a crew of about 80 men and 10 cannons. That was more than enough to attack and rob merchant vessels. Attacking warships with that setup was unwise. Only superstars like Bartholomew Roberts could afford that. With his crew of several hundred, nearly 50 cannons. The biggest difference between pirate ships and military or merchant ships was that pirates elected their captain. At a time when the poor had no rights, and most sailors came from those classes, pirates got to choose their leader. And having a choice is a pleasant thing. They also elected a specific person who monitored the captain to ensure he didn't overstep his authority. Any pirate could gather everyone on the main deck at any time and ask, "Who wants to elect a new captain?" If a majority of hands went up, a new leader was chosen. Easy.an unusual approach was also used for dividing the loot. For example, on a warship, the pay difference between the captain and a regular sailor could be 100 times. On a pirate ship, no one received a fixed salary. Everyone got a share. All the loot was divided roughly equally. The captain, or sailors with valuable skills, like navigation, might get slightly more, maybe 1.5 to 2 times the share of the others. That was the maximum. In short, pirate ships maintained a rough form of democracy and equality, tolerance and diversity. What's more, pirate ships of that time could be called a model of tolerance. 30, 40, 50, or even 60% of the crew were black at that time. The reason is simple. Pirates often captured slave ships. The living conditions on those ships were the most horrific, both for the sailors and the slaves they were transporting. Rare logbooks from 18th century slave ships survive. From them, we learn that practically every day of the voyage, someone died. The bodies of the slaves were simply thrown overboard. It's clear why sailors and slaves happily defected to the pirates. Because of this multinational makeup, authorities often called pirates villains of all nations. There were also many gay men among the pirates. In a closed environment like a ship, where the absolute majority of the crew were men, homosexual relations were not uncommon. On merchant or war ships, strict discipline was enforced, and such things were forbidden. On pirate ships, there was significantly more freedom and fewer restrictions. Those pirates who preferred women could theoretically find a wife to wait patiently for their return from sea. But these stories were rare. Besides, it was advantageous for captains to have crew members who had nothing holding them back on land. Pirates mostly settled for casual encounters ashore. Women pirates, and Bonnie and Mary Read, and sometimes they found a woman among their colleagues. Yes, there were women among them. They often joined a pirate ship disguised in men's clothes. It was possible to keep their gender a secret because pirates generally didn't change their clothes very often during a voyage. Can you imagine how it smelled below deck? Women who established themselves as good sailors could later make a kind of coming out. Though women pirates were few, some managed to leave their names in history, and Bonnie and Mary Read are the most famous female pirates of the Golden Decade. Bonnie became a pirate after starting a romance with one and running away from her parents' home. Mary Read switched to the pirates' side when the ship she was serving on as a sailor was captured. Both women earned a reputation as desperate pirates, often equal to, or surpassing, their male counterparts. Both were caught in 1720 and, like all pirates, sentenced to be hanged by a British court. But Anne and Mary used a loophole in the law. Both were pregnant at the time, and the law forbade hanging women carrying a child. They were sent to prison until the birth. Mary Read died there of a fever, while Bonnie disappeared, and her fate is unknown. According to some accounts, she managed to escape and lived to a ripe old age. Blackbeard, the ultimate showman, another superstar of that decade, was the pirate known by the nickname Blackbeard. Just look at the engraving of him. The beard, the pose. Does he remind you of anyone? Blackbeard was one of the prototypes for Captain Jack Sparrow. His real name was Edward Teach. This guy was the king of performance. First of all, he was very tall, about 6 feet. That might not seem like much today, but back then, the average man was only 5 feet to 5'3" before capturing a ship. Edward Teach would stuff his beard and hair with a special flammable powder, something like what's used for sparklers today. He would light it all up and board the enemy ship. With his entire appearance, Blackbeard told the enemy, "I am your worst nightmare. Surrender or die." Interestingly, Blackbeard wasn't the most successful pirate of the Golden Decade. He was far behind Bartholomew Roberts in the number of captured ships. But he had charisma. Thanks to it, Blackbeard has appeared in a massive number of fictional works over the centuries, from books to TV shows and video games. The Black Flag and the myth of buried treasure. Blackbeard, like other pirates, used another method of terrifying enemies, the Black Flag, the Jolly Roger. Everyone on the planet knows that the Black Flag with a skull and crossbones is the symbol of pirates. But it appeared specifically during that decade, from 1716 to 1726. One theory about its origin is this: on merchant or warships, the captain always kept a logbook where he recorded all important events, including the deaths of sailors, which, as we found out, was common. The record of a sailor's death was short, the sailor's name was written, and opposite it was drawn a skull and 2 bones, the sign of death.so, in a way. The skull and crossbones on a black flag was a metaphor for the sailor's death when he joined a pirate ship. For the pirate's enemies, it was the same powerful message: surrender or die. Pirates weren't always kind and gentle to their opponents. Yes, many released captured ships and crews after taking everything valuable. Newspapers of the time had many stories of people who had been held captive by pirates. But some captains were also known to brutally kill prisoners. By the way, the skull and crossbones wasn't the only pirate flag design. There were dozens. Each pirate ship chose its own design, but they all had recurring symbols: a skull, a skeleton, bones, or cutlasses. Another important detail that appeared on many flags was the hourglass. It signified limited time. Pirates knew their lives were very short, no longer than a regular sailor's, and perhaps even less. Authorities in various countries actively hunted and executed pirates. Diseases and serious injuries were common. The eye patch and the rock and roll life. This explains why the pirate image often includes a wooden leg, a hook hand, or an eye patch. There is a theory that pirates might have used the eye patch to adjust their vision when going from the brightly lit deck to the dark interior of the ship. They could just take off the patch and see in the darkness immediately, without wasting time adapting. This actually works. Try it at home. Close one eye for just a minute while you're in a bright room. Then go into a dark room. Look around with the open eye first, and then open the closed one. You'll see a lot more detail there. So, yes, that theory is plausible. But it's more likely that for most pirates, the patch was simply the result of an injury. Here's why. Just imagine 2 ships attacking each other. They approach side by side and start firing cannons. A cannonball slams into the wooden hull at high speed. Sharp splinters of various sizes fly everywhere, hitting people on board. This easily explains why so many pirates had injuries. Yet, despite all the drawbacks, many sailors became pirates, fully aware that their lives would be short and dangerous. They chose freedom. Perhaps this is the main reason why these specific pirates, from this one decade, became the enduring symbol for centuries to come. It was true rock and roll, and the pirates of that era were real rock stars. They defied the system. They lived as they pleased. They established a form of democracy on their ships. They died young and free. The poor masses admired them, while the aristocracy tried to suppress and destroy them. This is precisely why the idea of pirates burying treasure is a myth. First, there is no historical evidence for it. Second, what's the point of hoarding if your life is going to be short anyway? So, pirates tried to spend everything when they went ashore after a voyage, that the enduring legend the world powers weren't idle. Their efforts to catch pirates paid off. The Golden Age quickly came to an end, and by the mid-1720s, most famous pirates were either killed or executed around that time. A highly important book was published, A General History of the Pirates. This book was the first to detail the lives of the most significant pirates of the Golden Age. Writers, screenwriters, and other creatives later used this work extensively, which influenced how they portrayed pirates in their books and films. And from there, the typical pirate image landed directly into our heads, starting from childhood. That's the story. Big respect if you watched the video until this point. Please subscribe to the channel. I'll make something else interesting, and I'll see you in the next video. I hope this conversational translation works well for you. Is there anything else you'd like me to translate or analyze?